So we placed a special request to him and uh, requested him if he could really, cull out half an hour or maybe 40 minutes from his busy schedule. And he really obliged us. I'm really thankful, Dr. Pankaj, for taking out time for us. Since yesterday he could not give us his address, and we are really waiting for that. Now, I do not want to come in between you and Dr. Pankaj, who's already joined, and I request our young colleague, Dr. Ashish Thomas, to please introduce Dr. Pankaj Sheksaria to the audience. Ashish, over to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Thank you. It is my immense pleasure today to introduce the speaker for this opening session. Dr. Pankaj Seksaria is Associate Professor at the Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas at IIT Bombay. His research interests lie at the intersection of environment, science, technology, and society. He has published over 300 articles, features, and opinion pieces on these issues in peer reviewed journals and for India's mainstream English press. He has worked extensively in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and is the author editor of 4 books on various issues of the islands. These include Islands in Flux, The Andaman and Nicobar Story, The Last Wave, a fictional novel highlighting the ecological importance and vulnerability of the islands, and the Jarwa Tribal Reserve dossier. No wonder that he is one of the most consistent chronicler of contemporary issues in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Dr. Pankaj is someone who dons multiple hats. He is an author, photographer, freelance journalist, and an academic. He has been associated with the environmental action group Kalp Vriksh and works on environmental issues, wildlife conservation, and tribal rights. His education background is truly multidisciplinary, which explains his wide ranging academic and professional interests. He has a bachelor's degree in engineering from Pune University, a master's degree in mass communication from Jamia Millia Islamia, and doctorate in science and technology studies from Maastricht University, Netherlands. In his own words, his interest in wildlife and nature conservation stirred through the highly inspiring Save the Western Ghats movement and Narmada Bachao Andolan of the 1980s and 90s, in which he actively participated as well. He proudly calls himself a storyteller and has a unique way of delivering engaging and thought provoking talks using his photographed pictures. With these words, I now invite Dr. Pankaj Seksaria to deliver the special address. He will be talking on the topic at the trijunction of fragility and vulnerability, the story of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Over to you, Dr. Pankaj.
Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah, good morning to everybody. Thanks, Bhagwanji. Thanks, Ashish. Uh, you just made me sound more than I can perhaps deliver, so it's a tough call. But thanks to everybody for joining in. And just one small clarification, Ashish. You said 300 articles in peer-reviewed journals. That's not true. That's not possible. These are about 300 articles in newspapers and magazines. I do have about a dozen peer-reviewed articles. So
it was inclusive of both, I guess. So that's why I use both. Yeah.
It's better to clarify because 300 journal articles is it's certainly not going to be possible for me in my lifetime. But thank you very much. I will start off, and thanks for this great opportunity. I think this intersection of the environment and literature and eco-criticism is an area that academically I am not very involved in, but as a practitioner I have been. Like Ashish mentioned, I have been a journalist for a long time. And in the last 10 years or so, the idea of a different kind of engagement in language, I think is very important. And I've attempted my hand at fiction. So this novel that is based in the islands Ashish mentioned. In about a couple of months, I'll be publishing my first book for children, a picture book for children, which is also a story based in the Andaman Islands. I have I'm also an academic, so there's a different kind of writing over there. So it's why I'm saying all that is because I realize that, and certainly this community that is here will recognize the fact that our world is constructed through language. Not everybody will agree with that, but particularly in science and technology, it becomes a very interesting opportunity and a challenge to talk to scientists and technologists on how language constructs the world that we are part of. And I try and do that in my classes, which are actually ongoing at this point of time, both in policy and with hardcore engineers. And it's a very interesting exercise. And I will try and bring in some of those elements as well today in terms of what language means in the context of technology and, of course, the islands. I'm going to try and share my screen here. And if it works, that's fine. Otherwise, I think Ashish has a backup plan for, he has the presentations as well. So I have the PPT. Is the first slide visible?
It is. It is, sir. It is, sir.
And has the slide changed now?
No.
Can you see an image of a book on the name?
No. Are you showing the slide?
I am actually using the slide. Can you see a map of the islands? No.
No.
You're only seeing the first slide.
Yeah, just seeing the first slide.
There is some problem then. So let's then maybe let me just try the there's a PDF also.
Yeah, that
So
you can try that.
Yeah, I'll just try that, so it'll just be a little easier for me to manage the. No. Just a moment. It's not allowing me to share the screen now.
Really?
Have to. Can I just log? Okay, maybe Ashish, you can share.
Okay, just a minute then.
And just wait for me to say the next word. I mean, next instruction, and then you can change the slide.
Sure, I'll do that. Wait.
नहीं हो रहा?
1 minute बस. Okay, I'm presenting now.
Yeah, great. So while Ashish is putting on the presentation, yeah, great. Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. As you perhaps seen, the title is At the Trijunction of Fragility and Vulnerability, the story of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And just as a matter of fact, as a matter of fact, just over the last couple of days, I've been thinking and working on something similar. And what I realize is at the next level, the question that one might want to ask, and in the context of this conference and otherwise, I think, what would it mean to think like an island system? And I just want to go back to the first two plenaries that were there yesterday morning that I was able to attend. And the first speaker was speaking about the Yamuna in the Delhi, where all of you, or majority of the audience today is located. And the question would be, is Delhi in some senses the child of the Yamuna? And what would it mean for us to all think like a river? And would things change if we were to think like a river? What does a river need? What does a river generate? What is a river actually? And I ask this question because I think the challenges before us today in the way that we are galloping ahead, and I'm going to take the very specific example of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands as an example and an exemplar of what might be possible. And it's an open invitation to all of you to challenge and to agree, because it's something that is still evolving for me. How do we look at the larger context on the one hand, but also the specifics of the environments that we live in, and to acknowledge the fact that each ecosystem is a configuration of very specific, unique realities, which would be different for the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, would be different for the plains of the Ganga and the Yamuna, which would be different for the Western Ghats, would be different for the deserts of Rajasthan or the high mountains of the Himalayas. But as the title of the presentation suggests, I would argue that all these ecosystems that we are differently part of are in some senses can be configured at being located at the trijunction, at the junction of three axes. One of these, which is represented on the right hand side of this picture as three pictures that you see on the top, if I might kind of use a combination of ecology, geology, and the socio-cultural context, is that our world is constituted by these three elements, which could be located chronologically as one above the other. The first being the geology of the planet. If you go by the scientific idea of how the Earth came to be, basically the brick and mortar of the planet, the soils, the way the mountains are, the way the water flows, the way the gradients are, what the air is, where in some senses there was no life. Then we do know that over time, at a particular moment in the history of the planet, with processes we still don't fully understand, that life comes into being. This creates the ecology of the particular context. So that's why you have a certain ecology of the Himalayas, of the Gangetic Plain, of the coastline, of the island systems. And this is very dependent on what the soils and the mountains and the water and the air in that particular area is, which is why we know that Delhi is very different from neighboring Rajasthan deserts, or from the plains of Telangana, or indeed the islands of the Andaman and Nicobar. So what I'm saying is that the geology determines the ecology in very significant ways. You have different life forms, you have different plants, you have different what lives in water or air or on the ground. And the third, if I might argue, based on these two, is then the socio-cultural context. The human being comes much later in this chronological scale, and our entire system, human societies, human cultures, are dependent on this ecological and geological configuration. Don't just shift when I ask you to, yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that if you just go back 2 generations, even in our own lifetimes. So today, if you look at all of us, maybe in this crowd, if you were in an audience or auditorium, we would see ourselves dressed roughly in the same way, right? Men would be wearing shirts and pants, or maybe kurtas and pajamas, and women would be wearing saris and maybe salwar kameez, and the more younger generation would perhaps be in shirts and jeans and stuff like that. But if we just go back 2 generations and we will look at what our ancestors, what just our grandfathers or great-grandfathers and grandmothers wore, it would be a completely different kind of an attire. The houses that were built were completely different. The agriculture that was done in the Punjab was very different from what was done in Telangana. Or there was no agriculture in the Andaman Islands, for instance. And what we ate, the way we cooked, was all very dependent on this configuration. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that this is the reality of every particular place that we are part of. And this trijunction is a very fragile trijunction, because what is happening in my understanding is that one is all these things are in constant flux by itself. So a river is constantly flowing. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands, for instance, are constantly shaking because it's an earthquake-prone zone. So while our development and interventions sometimes are not cognizant of the reality of the place, and this is very much a function and an outcome of the Anthropocene, the amount of concrete that we have poured into the planet, the way that we have cut the mountains, the way that the rivers have been dammed, the way that the agricultural patterns have been changed, and areas like the deserts of Rajasthan and even Punjab, which are arid areas, we put in so much water that the fundamental characteristic of these places has changed. And this is a function of not accounting for the reality of the place on the one hand, and on the other end is that we have intervened so much that the existing balances have changed. And this fragility that is there of the system becomes a lot more vulnerable. So if you have the floods that we saw in Uttarakhand a few years ago, or in Kerala just 2 years ago, or the earthquakes and the disasters that are taking place in other parts of the world, we will realize that this is because of an extreme intervention that does not account for the specific configurations of this place. And unless we account and realize that these are, in some senses, the brute force of nature, while it's extremely beautiful, there's a savage beauty to nature, there's also a absolutely unenduring, or completely enduring brutal force, which I would not even say that nature will get back, but it will just be the way nature is, because the river has to flow from the mountain to the sea. The river cannot go in the opposite direction. So our idea that the river can be dammed and that the water of the river flows waste to the sea is a very engineering conception by which dams are built, by which agriculture is justified. And the river does not go waste to the sea. That's something very, very important. The river, it's in the natural flow of the life of the river to go to the sea. It plays very important functions on the coastline, etc., etc. So what you see in the image over here in the Andaman context are the three manifestations of the reality of the place: the geological reality, the ecological reality, and at the bottom is the socio-cultural reality. And I would argue, like I said in the beginning, that each place that we are part of has these three elements. Only the specifics are different. And I will try and illustrate this in the next 15-20 minutes of how this plays out in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and how it could perhaps play out in other ecosystems that we live in. I mean, Andaman is too far away for all of us. I sit in Bombay. Most of you are sitting in Delhi. How would this play out in the context where we are and what do we need to do? Next one, Ashish. And the idea of this whole kind of presentation and this thing of flux comes in the context of this book that Ashish mentioned. This is a kind of revised and updated edition that was published last year. This is a collection of my journalism over the last 25 years on the Nicobar and Andaman Islands. And the idea of flux, when we were thinking of the title of the book, what I realized in engaging with these islands for 25 years is the only thing that really stands out, and it's a function of the English language, is the only thing that is constant is change. And we see there's so much change that is happening in the islands, and I realized that that's the best way to characterize what I have seen. And you see this in all the three elements that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. And I will try and illustrate that very briefly because time is certainly a constraint. Next one, please. So quickly, these are the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, far away from mainland India, an accident of history that they are part of India. A very small place. There are about 600 odd islands, right from half a square kilometer to 1,000 square kilometers. So it's actually maybe, there are islands in the Andaman and Nicobar which are smaller than the area of the IIT Bombay campus that I am sitting on today. Certainly smaller than the campus of, say, JNU in Delhi. So really small, and then we have also very large islands. These are the peaks of a submerged mountain range known as the Arakan Yoma that comes from the north, Myanmar, you can see, to Sumatra in the south. And I just want to point you to this little star at the bottom of the map. If you look a little carefully, you will see that little landmark jutting out from the right-hand bottom corner. That is Sumatra in Indonesia, and you see a star there. And I just want to point out that star to you because for me and for the islands, it became a very important marker. This is the epicenter of the earthquake of December 2004 that caused that gigantic tsunami that we know these islands for. And you can imagine, this is only about 100 nautical miles from the Nicobar Islands. And you can imagine what impact this might have had on a place that is so close to the epicenter and also the origin of that tsunami. And this is a tsunami that killed about 400,000 people around the globe. And this is a very important reality of a place like the Andamans, which we cannot ignore when we think about development and intervention. Next, please. So, 8,000 square kilometers, relatively small, 400,000 people, which is, a small colony in Delhi might have those many people. So a really small place in that sense, but has very unique kind of characteristics, thickly forested. And I will just go into some of the ecological dimensions in the next slide. Next one, Ashish, please. Very rich forest system, an excellent example of a tropical forest. You can see the sea at low tide. You can see the mangroves at the first line of defense that is offered to land in the context of the oceans. And then you have these, towering rainforest trees. You can see the white strands on the top of the picture. This is a particular species of tree that is very good for plywood. And plywood industry was for a very long time the important industry in these particular islands. Next. Unique species of plants and birds and animals that you find in these islands. And I really won't have the time today to go into all the great details. And Ashish, I'm sure, would be extremely happy to see some of these pictures. This is a very, very unique bird. This is a bird known as the Nicobari megapode. The name suggests that it is found, interestingly, only in the Nicobar Islands on this planet. It is not found anywhere else in the world. This is in geology and in ecology. This is a concept of endemism, which is geographical restriction to a particular area. This is a bird which is very unique behavior. This is a bird that is about a chicken size, a domestic chicken or a murga sized bird. It builds a very interesting nest. You see this little layer of brown on which at the bottom of the bird's belly, this is actually a mound of earth. It's about 3.5, 4 feet. It's like a little mountain of earth that the parent bird has scraped together. And this mountain of earth of about 4 feet height is the nest of the bird. So the bird does not build the conventional nest that we know birds to build, but it makes this mound of earth and it lays its eggs inside that particular mound. And like again, the domestic chicken, it does not incubate the eggs. Birds normally we know sit on the eggs and the body warmth will incubate the eggs. These birds do not do that. It is the heat of the sun and the heat of the decaying matter in that mound of earth that incubates the eggs. Now there's a small problem for the bird here because a bird incubates the eggs. When it's incubating, it has a very instinctive sense of the right temperature of incubation. Here, this bird does not know what the temperature is. So this bird has some kind of a very rough thermal sensor in the tip of the beak. It's also known as the thermometer bird. It is constantly checking the temperature around the eggs to figure out that it is the right temperature for incubation. Just a fantastic, innovation or an evolutionary trait that the bird has to ensure its survival in the wild. Next. I'll just give you some examples. This is a forest, a mangrove forest, a very important dimension of any coastal system, and certainly the Andaman and Nicobar. They play very crucial roles in the ecology, in the fisheries, in the livelihoods of people who depend on fisheries. And again, very interesting adaptations because a coastal system is a very complex system. We all know that roots grow towards gravity. Here you see an example where roots are growing against gravity. These are what are known as pneumatophores. If some of you would recollect your biology or botany textbooks in school, roots that allow the plant to breathe, they grow away from gravity, they grow towards the sun. Their pneumatophores are breathing roots. They have small pockets of air inside and they help the plant breathe. Next. This is an amazing creature. This is not a creature here, but this is the tracks of a creature that is left behind on the beaches of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The oceans are home to about 7 species of sea turtles. See, one of the most amazing creatures that we have on planet Earth. They spend their entire lives in the ocean, but very important is that they are born on these thin strips of land that we know as beaches, which we are putting to all kinds of crazy developmental structures today. Now, turtles are born on beaches. If it's a male turtle, they will be born on this beach and go back into the ocean and never come back. If it's a female turtle, she is likely to come back to the same beach to lay her eggs when she becomes a mature adult. And if you imagine and think about what we are doing to our beaches today, beaches are so thin that on a globe of the world, on a map, you can't even make out that there is a beach. But for this creature, which has been on the planet for millions of years before human being came to be, these beaches are crucial for their survival. And the way we are destroying our beaches for defense projects, for infrastructure projects, for SEZs, for tourism projects, it is amazing how careless and insensitive we are, because if the beaches go, the turtles are gone. And there are many, many layers of sensitive detail here. I'll just give one example. Just go to the next one, Ashish. Now, this is a giant leatherback turtle. The track that you saw is of the giant leatherback turtle. It is the largest of the 7 sea turtles. And if there was an award for a gentle giant, it would be for this creature. This can grow up to 6 feet in length. Yeah, it can be 700 kilograms in weight. And the baby turtle, when it is born, will fit in the palm of a human hand. And this baby turtle, I don't have the time to go into the details, but this baby turtle is born in the pitch dark of the night when the mother is not there, because the mother lays her eggs and goes back to the ocean. In the case of the giant leatherback, 90 days later, the babies are born, about 100 of them. They crawl outside, they crawl out of the nest of the sand, and they go back to the ocean like they were following their nose. And just pay attention to what I'm saying here, because science tells us that the key clue or the key cue that the baby turtle has is the light of the stars and the moon reflected on the surface of the water. Even on a dark Amavasya night, or even on perhaps a night with the clouds, if you stand on a coastline where there is no artificial light, you will see that the light on the ocean side is many degrees higher than the light on the land side. And imagine this. If you close your eyes for a moment and think of a night where you are only going to be guided by the light of the stars, and not the light of the stars, the light of the stars reflected on the surface of the water. Imagine this is the clue that a baby turtle gets. Now open your eyes and go to a beach in Goa or go to a beach in Bombay and see the amount of lighting that we have on the coastline. And just think what will happen to these beaches, to these babies. And this is just one dimension, yeah? So our responsibility, and not just to ourselves, but also the larger creatures that we're talking about, I think become very, very critical. Next. Marine life, I really need to jump because I have only 15 minutes. So let me go ahead. I won't go into details, but I think I'm able to communicate to you the fragility that I'm talking about in the title of my presentation. And what would it mean to think like an island then, if I have to think of the just born baby turtle who will be guided by the light of the stars reflected on the ocean? What would it mean for us as human beings to do or not do in that island system? If an island system as a mother is to think of the fate of that baby turtle. Next. I won't go into the details because they're very interesting dimensions. Just to very quickly refer to the human dimension. This is a very unlikely picture of the Jarawa community, which some of you may have read about.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we can continue till 10. So this is very interesting, sir.
Okay,
we will
fine,
never
fine.
want maybe to hear all this, and it's so beautiful. Please continue till 10 if you can. Thank you, sir.
And I'll always be happy to come back and do a larger lecture for your students, either in English or Ashish's students in zoology. I'd be very happy to do a larger talk in more detail. But yeah, so we have another 15 minutes. I will take that time. Thank you so much. So just to this is a picture by an anthropologist friend, Vishwajit Pandya. I just want to this could be a 2-hour talk actually, but one doesn't have the time in the context that I'm speaking. So this is a picture of a community known as the Jarawa that have been in these islands perhaps for 40,000 years. That's what recent genetic work has told us. It's a small community of about 400 people. Seeing rapid change, the rights of these communities were something that we were involved in the Supreme Court in terms of some activism and things like that. But again, the point I want to make here is that they've been here for 40,000 years. Their understanding of the forest, they live lives in ways that we don't understand, in the way that we can't even comprehend. There is another community that lives in these islands that are known as the Onge, one of whose primary engagement with the world is through the sense of smell, not through sight. They experience the world. They even say that life enters their body and children are born through the sense of smell and through the nose in that sense. What does it even mean? I'm not able to even understand that because that is not my experience. But this is a very integral part of these islands. But they are extremely, extremely vulnerable. They're extremely marginalized. I'll just give you one example of the Great Andamanese, which is another community. In about 1850, about 150 years ago, or about now 200, 175 years ago, when the British first started to kind of take over these islands, they made a count of that community that was about 5,000 people, the Great Andamanese. Today, they are only about 50. So an entire community with a combination of health, changing life, takeaway of lands, has pushed an entire viable community that was here for 40,000 years to the brink of extinction. And it's very convenient for the modern Indian state to blame the British, but we have been doing that exactly in the last 70 years of our independence. So a community that was viable has been there for thousands of years, and the Jarawas are experiencing that today, are being slowly pushed to the brink of extinction. It is a very integral part of that system. There are many layers of politics, of ideology, of concern that we need to look at, but that's really a nutshell, is that they've been there for a very long time. I'm not sure how long they're going to survive. All the indigenous communities in these islands, they're very small numbers. There's a very interesting logic to why the numbers are small. But the fact of the matter is that at least 2 of them are on the brink of extinction. The other 2 might be getting pushed to that brink over there. Next. I want to jump now. Next one, Ashish. I want to jump to that other geological reality, which is a very fascinating reality of the place. And here you see, so we all know 2004 for the tsunami. But what we don't realize is that the tsunami is caused by an earthquake. And what happened in the Andaman and Nicobar Island, which is not very well known, and I have been writing about it. I have a couple of journal papers one of those 300 that Ashish mentioned, that talks about the geological reality. And I would just like to, I would like you to look at my, I don't know if you can see my screen, maybe you can't, but if you were to imagine the Andaman and Nicobar Islands as your hand, from your toe, from your fingers to your elbow, for instance, the Andamans in the north, the Nicobar in the south, with Port Blair roughly in the middle as a pivot. And now just imagine a seesaw in a child's playground that we have in our colonies. One side goes up and one side comes down. What happened on December 26, 2004, when the earthquake happened, is that with Port Blair roughly as a metaphorical and a physical pivot, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands were lifted up by about 4 feet. And the Nicobar Islands, the southern tip, what is known as Indira Point, submerged by 15 feet that morning. So if we are standing on the roof of a conventional house today in our cities, which is about 10 feet in height, 10 to 12 feet, if you are standing on the roof of your house in Great Nicobar, you would be waist deep in water the moment the earthquake happened. And what you see as the images in this particular slide over here are very, very interesting, because you will see at the bottom of the slide, Indira Point, you will see -4 meters, which is roughly the submergence that took place. And you will see on the top left, there's a place called Interview Island. You will see something, and maybe Ashish, if you can scroll your arrow and show, because I won't be able to do that. Yeah, there. You will see, let it go to the top left, Ashish. You will see +1 meters to +2 meters. That's right. That is the uplift that took place on this particular island, say. And if you look at the images on the right, these are satellite images from December 2021, which is 4 days before the tsunami, and December 26, which is the day of the tsunami. And you see the yellow circles. You will see that the red line, the red circle on the red in the yellow circle on the left, in an island called Kachal, which is all land. On 26th of December is all underwater. It's not land anymore. Thousands of people died in this particular island because this submergence took place. So what happened there was that because of the geological reality and the submergence, we had huge, you can almost imagine 30-foot waves are actually 40-foot waves, because the land has submerged by about 10 feet. Now, this is the reality of the place. This is a geological reality that we cannot escape. And I'll come to the more details of that. Next one, please. Maybe we can just, this is what happened in Nicobar. This is islands. This is that land that I'm talking about, which was, you can see land, you can see, agricultural fields, you can see forests that are now permanently submerged and destroyed because of permanent submergence, and the sea has come in. Next. This is what happened on the northern side. This is of that Interview Island I mentioned. A coral reef, which is permanently underwater, is now permanently above water. You can see this is a picture I took about just 2 months after the earthquake. I had a chance to be on a field visit there. This is almost 180 degrees of view, 11 pictures stitched together. And you can see an entire coral reef. These boulders that you see in the coral reef are about 5 feet in height. What was permanently underwater is now permanently above water. So there's a complete shift in the geology of the place. Next one, Ashish. Next. Now, this is a very interesting figure. You will see this big yellow star in the middle. Can you point it out, Ashish? Yeah. This is the, little niche, Ashish. There, that's right. This yellow star is the epicenter of the earthquake of December 2004. And all you see above the yellow star are small yellow circles, yellow dots. These yellow dots, this is a USGS, United States Geological Service map of 2018. All the yellow circles are earthquakes in the Andaman and Nicobar waters between 2004 and 2008. So like a river is supposed to flood, like there will be drought in a desert, this is a place where earthquakes happen every week. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands have an earthquake on an average every week. Some of them are very strong earthquakes. Next one. Next, Ashish. Can you go to the next slide, Ashish? Have we lost Ashish?
I think there's a network problem he's having. Ashish, can you hear us?
Niti, please call him and check.
Yes, ma'am, I'm calling.
Yeah, he's come. Ashish, will you? So maybe I can try and share. Can I?
Give him a minute, sir. I think he'll pick up.
He's back. You're visible. Could you just change the slide? Now you'll have to reshare actually.
I am.
Ashish, I think he's got logged off.
He'll rejoin.
He's just rejoining. He had some network issues.
So while he logs in, I'll just continue with making the point, and we can see the illustration. Is that if some of you are aware of the Ring of Fire, which goes around the Pacific and includes the west coast, I think, of the Americas and North and Latin America, this is the place where the maximum earthquakes happen, where the maximum volcanoes happen, where the maximum tsunamis are generated, and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands is a part of that Ring of Fire. So any development intervention that is going to be made in these islands has to be cognizant of the fact that this is one of the world's most earthquake-prone zones. 9.3 on the Richter scale is a huge earthquake that happened in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. We just go back to the earlier slide, Ashish. I just want to, and then, yeah, here it is. This is the Ring of Fire. You will see on the left-hand side of the map, you will see Great Nicobar. This is roughly where this, and you will see Sumatra. And what you see, the triangles are actually volcanoes. So we actually have an active volcano in these Andaman Islands. Next one. I want to now jump quickly into the historical part. When I started working in the islands about 25 years ago, with a lot more hair and certainly a lot more black hair, with a lot more anger in my kind of disposition, one of the things that I came across was 3 or 4 reports that had laid out the development paradigm for these islands. And you know, here language becomes so fascinating, and all of you in this seminar will easily recognize it. I'll just give you one example of one key report of the 1950s and 1960s that set out the development paradigm for these islands. And there are 2 examples here that I want to illustrate for you. Next one, Ashish. There's a chapter in this development plan called Colonization. Now, you know, it's a very striking moment to look at a country that became free in 47. Within 20 years is talking the language of the colonizer. It's talking of wanting to colonize. And one might argue that all our cities, and you know, we have lots of colonies, and whether it is the same thing, and perhaps it may not have been meant in the way that the British colonized its empire, because even the British would not have agreed, or any colonizer would not say that we are colonizing for our gains, but it's also in everybody's interest. But the use of language, I think, becomes very, very critical. There's a choice of words to be made. Why is it that we choose certain words? And again, students of language will understand, but to communicate to engineering and science students that language is not innocent takes some effort, and that's what I've been trying to do in my classes here. Next one, Ashish. Look at this. They talk of these lands as being Jarawa infested. This is a high-powered committee from India's capital, New Delhi, that goes for 3 days and says we understand the islands, and then they refer to these islands as infested. How language performs. This is a land in which the Jarawas have lived for 40,000 years. This is a land that by Indian constitution is protected in the name of the community. There's a tribal reserve in which the Jarawa live. It is not anybody's land that has been given to them. It is their land. The moment you use infested, just imagine if you said it was Jarawa inhabited or it was Jarawa owned. The performity of language becomes so relevant, because the moment we have articulated this as infested, of course, we have to remove that infestation. And in some senses, in a very sub-context or an intuitive level, that has been the development paradigm of this particular place. Next. Next. And you know, it is this development paradigm that when you don't think like an island, if I might argue, look at this log that is there. This is a full-grown elephant. This is a 1998 picture I took on my first visit to the island. It's one of the simplest pictures that I have taken, but it is in 25 years of picture taking. It is one of my favorite pictures because it says everything. Imagine this is a diameter here of the log, which must be about at least 12 to 15 feet diameter. Imagine what the scale of the tree would have been. Imagine what the scale of the forest would have been. Imagine what was the way that people who were living there were living in that particular place. Next one. So quickly, we'll just move on because I want to come to really the last couple of points. Next, Ashish, please move on. And you know, the sad part is that in the 60s, we were talking of a Jarawa infested kind of articulation. This is a map from a report done by Niti Aayog in 2017. And I wrote about this in the Hindu. It is completely, in 2017, it is even more ignorant and more arrogant about the reality of the place. It does not acknowledge, it proposes a development plan that will invite thousands of crores worth of investment. And believe me, because you must, it does not have one paragraph in a 60-page document that talks about the geological vulnerability. It does not talk about the ecological fragility. It does not talk about the fact that this place is inhabited by tribal communities for thousands of years, that there are legal protection that these people have. It proposes developmental projects in tribal reserves which have constitutional guarantees. It's a document as ignorant as it is arrogant. Next one. It is completely, that's what I'm saying, this fragility and vulnerability, this accounting for the reality of the place. If we don't do that, we're going to create trouble. Imagine putting in a 1,000 crore project in an area that has 9 on the Richter scale earthquakes at regular intervals. Imagine what will happen to that investment. Next one. You know, in that same report, they talk about what happens in Dubai. These are the Palm Islands. So, like I say, sometimes, you know, they have that much akkal to talk about Dubai and what happened, but they have no idea that there was an earthquake of 9.3 in the Richter scale just 5 years or 10 years in these very islands. So it's certainly not that they don't have the capacity. It's just the choices that we make, and this is a very, very problematic dimension that we have to look at. Next one. And it gets worse. I mean, just go ahead. This is the Niti Aayog proposal for what they call holistic development, deeply problematic. Next one. I've written a lot about it. So again, you know, a very prominent commentator, Ashok Malik, you may have even read about him in 2014, writing in Hindustan Times. He talks of the islands as a price piece of mid-ocean real estate. How language performs, right? When you talk about land as real estate, it creates an image. It creates a certain idea of what we can do with that land. And why should it be real estate? What happens to the people? What happens to their histories? What happens to the nesting turtle? What happens to the fishes that swim in these oceans? I mean, do they have no other identity? Are they not going to be there, whatever way you look at that? What happens if you turn the lens and look at the world as a turtle would look, or as the island would look, or a tribal would look? And what would then happen to what we would do? Would it still be then a piece of mid-ocean real estate? Obviously not. And that is the critical point that I want to make. Next. It gets worse. You know, and this is where in today's times, I think questioning people in power and authority is very important. In a defense seminar in Port Blair in 2009, the late former President Kalam, actually proposes a nuclear power station, a 250 megawatt nuclear power station as his vision for these islands. 5 years after the world's biggest earthquake, the world's biggest tsunami, here you have such a leading light go and say that my vision is 250 megawatt nuclear power station. What is scary in this whole thing, and I go back to my earlier first slide, what is this fragility and vulnerability? What is it about thinking like the place? Is this vision? What is this technocratic, power-driven, power-hungry vision of so much? I mean, it's very masculine, for instance. We have to keep that in mind. I think our second speaker yesterday talking about the gender dimension. What does it mean to have a 250 megawatt nuclear power station? What is it going to benefit, and why do we want it at all? What is this vision? Where is it coming from? What is seeking to achieve? I think are very deep questions we have to ask. Next, and I'm going to finish in the next couple of minutes. There is very interesting, and I just make a big jump here, very interesting work in the sociology and philosophy of technology that I now work in. And I'm trying to link up these disparate areas of ecology and history, and is of Louis Mumford, an American philosopher, talking of the polytechnic and the monotechnic. And we won't have time, but just please access this author and this language, you will see how beautiful it captures the reality of the dilemmas and the challenges of the current technocratic imagination that we have for our planet and why it is problematic. Next one. And there's a very beautiful, more recent articulation by another scholar called Shira Jasonov, who talks of the technologies of hubris, yeah, and which he talks about being male, being about power, being about control, whereas the world and the earthquakes cannot be in human control. And she talks of the world being driven today by technologies of hubris. How beautifully language can actually communicate how we look at the world. And the next one, and she talks of the need for technologies of humility. And there's a very interesting definition of what that means. And I would urge you all to look at that, particularly as scholars in English and language, because here we can link up technology paradigms and the technology growth and the ecological concerns and bring in language and capture what the reality of the place is and what our intention should be. Next. I'm done here. Next. Just to quickly, these are the two books. If any of you all get around to reading them, I'd be very glad to hear back from you. The one on the right-hand side is the novel, which will tell the story in a fictionalized form. Islands in Flux, we've already spoken about. Next one. Okay. So on the right-hand side top is actually a Kannada translation of The Last Wave, which was published 2 years ago in Bangalore by Nav Karnataka. At the bottom left is a document that's available online. It's a UNESCO document we did on the Jarawa Tribal Reserve that gives you some details. You can access it very easily. And I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much. I was hoping that there'd be little time for discussions, but thanks for listening and for this opportunity. I'm available to be contacted. My email was there in that last slide, but I guess we're running out of time. So you can please access my email from the organizers of the conference, and I'd be very happy to hear back and respond. And if it's exactly 10, so maybe you can wrap up. If organizers can decide if there are a couple of minutes for questions or any feedback, I'm available. Yeah, here is my email ID. Very simple. It's P with my surname and Gmail. So do feel free to write in. Thank you very much for your patient listening. And if we have time for some reactions and questions, but if not, that's fine too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pankaj. It was really a very enthralling speech, talk about the Andaman Nicobar Islands, and just that we have a bit short in time.
Yes, I know, I understand, absolutely.
Otherwise, we could have a very good discussion. But we have got good responses on the chat.
I saw some, yes.
Yeah, and so people have been really interested now. It's Abhishek Sharma just said it's a very insightful understanding about the island, and we know so less about the islands. We know islands only for the tourism part. Okay, let's go to Andaman for tourism, but we don't understand what is going on there in reality at the ground level with the tribal people, with the ecosystems. So it gives a very good understanding about all those aspects. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Our demand is that we should have a full session with him another time.
Sure.
Yes, there's a demand. We will have you back, Dr. Pankaj.
I'll be very privileged and honored. Thank you so much. I would need to log off because I will get into another class.
Sure.
All the best in the conference, and I'm hoping we can take I'm also hoping that we can take this forward in more academic kinds of things, because where I am located, I have the place. How can a technology institution and a literature department, for instance, collaborate? And we should be doing it within IIT as well. We have an expertise and literature here, but let's see how we can take this forward in more constructive ways. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you. I think your colleague also joined, Ms. Saloni Bhati also joined. Yes. Thank you so much for that also.
Bye-bye, everybody.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Over to Geeta ma'am for the next session.
Thank you, Ashish. Good morning, all. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Kalyan Paul. Mr. Paul completed his master's in economics from BITS Pilani followed by a master's in social work from Delhi University, India in 1979. He has been directly involved with community development programs since 1980, when he joined the National Dairy Development Board at Anand to organize a 3-tier cooperative infrastructure for procurement, processing, and marketing of milk for small and marginal farmers in Operation Flood, the largest anti-poverty program in the world. He was also involved with conceptualizing and preparing of crucial sector reforms in irrigation, salt, and wastelands development at the Dairy Board. In 1992, he co-founded Pan-Himalayan Grassroots Development Foundation, a voluntary organization which promotes holistic river basin restoration through active engagement of communities in the Indian Himalayan region. Kalyan was selected as a Ashoka Fellow in the same year due to his role as a prime change maker. He holds the portfolio of Executive Director in Grassroots, besides being the chief promoter of guilds of barefoot engineers involved with spreading the benefits of appropriate technologies in various cross-cutting sectors like community managed drinking water, environmental sanitation, rainwater harvesting, and renewable energy. His major responsibility is to organize communities across river basins for renewal of hydrology through adoption of appropriate technologies in soil and moisture conservation, followed by establishment of community-owned micro-enterprises to improve livelihoods. Kalyan has been honored with the Jamnalal Bajaj Award for application of science and technology for rural development in 2012. Besides being featured as an outstanding social entrepreneur in other forums, he is a founder member and currently president of Participatory Guarantee System Organic Council, which is a pan-India organization responsible for promoting traditional farming systems and adopting of value chains to enable small farmer groups to enhance on-farm incomes. Kalyan is also engaged with Mountain Partnership Secretariat at Food and Agriculture Organization of UN at Rome to create a marketing platform for producer groups from the mountains of the world. This initiative includes the conceptualization and implementation of a mountain-specific participatory guarantee system for formation of farmer groups and adoption of value chains in order to promote traditional natural farming by small farmers. He continues to live and work from a tiny hamlet at 6,000 feet in the central Himalaya, focused about bringing forth sustainable change and development at the grassroots through active engagement of mountain communities. Thank you, Mr. Paul, for agreeing to address participants in this webinar. And over to you, Mr. Paul.
Okay, thank you, Geeta, for inviting me to talk to all of you. As you can understand from the introduction you gave to everybody, I'm a bit intimidated to be in the company of such people in the academia from where I left a century ago. So I've been living and working in the villages, as Geeta was saying. So I would like to just start off on this massive topic, man and nature, with a quote from Guru Nanak, who was one of the early conservationists, 500 years ago. And he says that air is the Guru, water the father, earth the great mother. They give us life. We sleep in their lap. We should not spoil them. So millions of people, am I audible? Can you hear me well?
Yes, you're perfectly audible. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. So the point is, not just Guru Nanak's hymns, which are sung every day by millions of us, but 500 years ago, he said that. 5,000 years ago, if we go back, the Bhagavad Gita urges us to protect environment and biodiversity for our survival. And millions of us recite the Gayatri Mantra every day. Yet the message has not been internalized, we feel. And probably what's happened is that the entire process of industrialization in the last 250 years has sort of severed this linkage between man and nature. And so even though we try to hark back every day by singing the hymns of the Gita or the Guru Nanak Ji's or other gurus of the various religions of the world, the point is that somehow we need to get together and internalize the essential linkage between us and nature where we belong. And so what I'll try to do is that instead, very seldom I've spoken for 40 minutes, 45 minutes at a stretch, because in the community it's always, you're sitting with a group of people and talking, and I don't think I've spoken for more than 6-7 minutes at a time. So I'm going to try and talk a bit, and if your format permits, then maybe we should have an open sort of discussion over some of the points which I would like to mention. So, yesterday I was listening to Mr. Murali Shivaramakrishna's talk, and he happened to mention one of my favorite books, The Small is Beautiful, written by E.F. Schumacher, which we studied in the early 70s when we were in college. Where Geeta mentioned I was in Pilani and studied economics there. And just just a bit later, I would like to talk a bit more about Schumacher. But for that, at a personal level, I would like to say that this essential linkage between man and nature, how do we, each one of us, bring it together in our lives? I mean, well, for us, what happened was that if you read somebody like, say, Vivekananda, for example, and now Vivekananda, through his meditation and the blessings of his guru, Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda showed a path just when this linkage was severe during industrial times, the pre-industrial, the new industrial time. And he brought in a whole concept of the Vedanta philosophy, and where you could choose, for example, you could choose Karma Yoga, for example, and which Karma Yoga meant that you learn how to empathize and how to serve humanity. And if you could do that, then through your service to humanity, you would bring in, not only at your personal level, a linkage between yourself and nature, but you would also enable hundreds of other people in the communities where you serve to do essentially the same thing and build on that whole feeling of man's essential nature itself, which ought to be linked with Mother Nature, And now, if you bring it down to more contemporary times, and get out of Vivekananda's time, and you look at somebody like Schumacher, and Schumacher says that, economics should be studied as if people mattered. Okay. Now, that's a very, very important statement to have made, that the study of economics as if people matter and not as if just commerce and cash matter, right? Now, if you take Schumacher's philosophy then, along with Vivekananda's philosophy, and look at man and nature, now look at somebody like Verghese Kurian, who sat in a small village in Anand and spent his entire life to plan and encourage and inspire people to change the dairy sector of India. Okay, and the leading example of that, all his work, is the brand called Amul. Okay, it's one of the biggest corporations today, a cooperative in the form of organization. It helps millions of small farmers, and yet it is based on exactly the principles of what Vivekananda was talking about, what Schumacher was talking about. That small is beautiful. All these Amul brand products which you people, I'm sure, enjoy, is coming out of the few half liter, 1 liter of milk which millions of farmers pour every day in the morning and night. And so essentially the organization, what I'm trying to explain to you, is extremely, extremely small, the unit. It is at the village level. And from that small is beautiful, it sort of federates at the district level. And from the district level, it sort of federates at the state level. And from various state levels in India, it federates at the national level. But essentially, it is what Schumacher was talking about, is what Dr. Kurian and his teammates, we were, you know, we were sort of blessed to work in the National Dairy Development Board and learn all this, in the Operation Flood program on how small is beautiful can be translated at the ground level, at the grassroots. Now, if you bring it to another level, let's say, in the 80s, when somebody like Amartya Sen started writing about, welfare economics, and especially about the fact that the choice of technology is so important in how you deal with the problems of man on this planet. So let me give you an example of the choice of technology, what Amartya Sen as an economist was talking about. Like say where we live in the mountains and there's a huge ecological crisis and therefore there's a problem of availability of water, let's say in the communities. Now you have a situation where you need to choose which technology you should use to provide sufficient quantities of, say, potable water to communities. So you could go to the natural water resources, which is at the tertiary level, which is at the rivers, or at the secondary level, which is like, say, a few miles away from the village in a reserve forest, or you can look at the primary water resource in the same village jurisdiction where the community lives. Okay. Now, if you actually believe and respect that communities chose the correct piece of land to set up their village, so then you just need to probe a little bit and find out the water resource right within that village, right? Now, if you find the water resource within the village jurisdiction and then choose the appropriate technology to enable the access of that water to the community over there, then what you're essentially doing, you're giving the community the freedom to access that water resource on a daily basis without being dependent on an external agency. For example, if you went to the tertiary source in the river, now that will require massive pumping systems, it will require overhead tanks, it will require engineers and technocrats and government departments, and the community would be forever dependent on these external sources. So what Sen was trying to say is that the choice of technology, it matters a lot on so on how you actually enable communities to set up their lives. And so now another thing linked to it, and we were talking about whether I should, mention this today, is that there's such a problem of hydrology now, the renewal of hydrology, even though we have sufficient rainfall in our mountains, is the complexion of the forest resource, which has changed since the last 250 years, since the colonial times, when the broadleaf species were removed and commercial species like the pines were brought in. And it doesn't sort of allow, this kind of vegetation doesn't allow the percolation of the rainwater to renew the hydrology. So over the years, in the last 30 years, we've encouraged communities to raise village nurseries, raise the native broadleaf species in their village nurseries, plant them in the barren lands on the hill slopes. And it's very encouraging to talk about it today to a group like you, that simple villagers who are essentially farmers and not foresters have been able to recreate and bring back native forests, on their degraded land. And so it's quite possible to do that. The other thing I thought we should flag, especially because it's the year of the pandemic, is that for years now we've been talking about something called zoonosis. I don't know how many of you have heard of zoonosis, but it's a new science. It's been flagged from the first decade of this century, and not many people have discussed it sufficiently enough. But basically, what essentially zoonosis is trying to say is that the industrial production systems of meat and heavy dosages of antibiotics and other chemicals, it has led to breaking the essential linkage between man's food and nature, which is supposed to provide food. Because instead of nature providing food, now more or less it's like an industrial production of food. And the direct outcomes of all these faulty systems of production is, of SARS, you've heard of MERS, and now we are in the midst of COVID-19. It's almost going to be a whole year in another month that mankind is, that we are suffering from this pandemic, and God alone knows when we can sort of get out of the problem we got ourselves into. But the pandemic, the way to look at it, the way we feel that we ought to look at it, and I'm sure that today most of the people who are participating in this webinar are young people who are still in university perhaps. And so what I would urge you all to do, all of us to do, is at our own level to be able to understand now at a serious level within ourselves that, hey, look, I mean, between March and now, for several months, we've gone through so much of lockdowns, we've changed our lifestyle in so many ways. And aren't there a whole lot of things which we've been able to do without in the last 6 months, 7 months, 8 months? Hasn't our lives become much more simpler? And can we continue with some of these ways of living in the years ahead, in the decades ahead in our life? For example, let me say something which all of us can do and which will lead to bringing back a linkage between man and nature. Okay, like suppose we all hanker for safe foods. Okay, so we say that instead of this industrial production and we would like to get a basket of organic food on a regular basis to our home, to our kitchens. Now, if we do that, what are we essentially doing? We are enabling the farmers in our villages to actually start growing their traditional food basket, which had 12, 15 items in it, and not just two cash crops like rice and wheat. So once farmers start producing the traditional food crops and that's provided in the market, then that changes what you and me are eating at home. And if you're eating better, more nutritious food, and you're ready to pay for that organic, safe food, so essentially you are enabling thousands and millions of small farmers, okay, to continue with their lifestyle, which is very, very deeply linked with nature. In the mountains, for example, in Kumaon and Garhwal, they have so many festivals people have, but one of the most fascinating festivals they have every year during monsoon is called Harela. And that's basically, an offering to the gods, to Mother Nature, about the food which the land gives to people. And so that's where I would like to end my talk, for whatever it is worth, to urge people to look at nature in a more holistic way, and look at nature not in a manner that it is something which is beyond the urban citizens to participate. Because as I said, that even if the urban citizens participate in the process of encouraging organic food in the markets, that itself is a huge step that you be taking, not only for yourself but for others, in providing a linkage again between man and nature. And don't forget that while you do that, that at a macro level, at the United Nations, all countries of the world have got together 30 years ago to do exactly that, through what is defined as the Sustainable Development Goals, for which many civil society organizations and governments all across the globe are working towards making the world into a better place, so that the hymns of Guru Nanak and the Gita and etc. Okay, they actually become much more meaningful in our daily lives and make our lives more wholesome and happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalyan, for your
Thank you.
talk. And I think, Indra, we can take a few questions.
Yes, I was going to come to that. The session is now open for questions, observations, if any. Participants, you can switch on your mics and ask questions. We have a question for you, sir. If you can please tell us how to convince the community to change the way they have been working and growing to adopt new ideas.
Yeah, sure. Look, the communities in India, okay, they have been largely impoverished due to hundreds of years of rapacious kind of policies which have impoverished them. And basically, what they've lost, I mean, the starting point for a community in India, in rural India, let us say, where we work, is that they lack what is called social capital. Okay, they don't have capital to, move out of that well of poverty. So one of the first things we do to encourage people to change their systems at the village level is to start collecting, start saving a very, very small amount of money in a common kitty. So that's called a self-help group. You may have heard of that, these SHGs. Now, for example, in a small river basin in Gagas, where we are near Ranikhet, so some just 200 SHGs, 200 small groups of women, they have now 160 lakh rupees of their own money, which is called the social capital. Now, once you encourage women to come together and start creating their own social capital, you know what happens? Immediately, they get a huge amount of confidence in dealing with their lives. For example, suppose they need to they need 10,000 rupees to repair their home, okay, or they need 5,000 rupees for their children's education. So they don't need to be dependent on anybody. They can dig into that pot of theirs and pull out that money, utilize it, and then return it back into it with a small interest. And you will be surprised that to know that there is no default in the system, because there's immense peer pressure to continue with this properly. It's a very, very beautiful informal banking system, which across the subcontinent in India, even in Bangladesh, in Nepal, and some other countries, is doing very, very well, where women come together, have their own sort of banks, and they utilize that money to not only do invest in education and shelter, etc., but quite often, like in the case of us in Ranikhet, the women have actually invested that money and set up a producers company called Umang now. And now their producers company it's a small company. There are 1,500 women shareholders of that. They own that company. They have 4 business verticals. They do about 200 lakh rupees worth of business every year. You know, so 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 what I'm trying to say is that you can motivate communities to firstly get their basic daily act together in terms of provision of potable water, maybe some cooking energy in terms of biogas units, which we help them with, some sanitation facilities, and planting trees and growing back their forests to renew the hydrology in their catchment area. And once people are enabled to lead a better quality of life, then they can quickly move into investing into their, building their social capital, and then taking part as entrepreneurs in setting up micro enterprises and setting up social businesses. Yeah. Does that answer what you were asking?
Yes, sir, that does. There's another question from Nidhi Verma.
Yeah.
Sir, could you talk a bit about your organization, the Pan Himalayan Grassroots Development Foundation? Where did you get the inspiration? How do you manage to get funds to manage this work?
See, I mean, 40 years ago, life was much more simpler in India, because there were, for several reasons, let's not get there. But we cracked learning all this, as I told you, in the National Dairy Development Board in Anand, where my wife and me, after we finished our social work, the Masters of Social Work, and we worked as peer team members with Anand folks. And there we learned how to organize communities on the principles of what I mentioned, Schumacher, as small is beautiful. And we did that for almost a decade. And then we shifted to the mountains. And basically, whatever we learned in terms of community organization in Operation Flood, we wanted to devote our life to do something similar with communities in the mountains. So when we came there, we gave ourselves 6 months' time to learn about mountain ecosystems, because we had very little idea. This was way back in 1987. And so that's now what, more than 30 years we've been there. And so, yes, so what is it's actually quite simple even for people to do now. But to answer your question, in our days, it was simpler because we had a lot of role models, you know, ahead of us. And they sort of motivated us to get into rural development and spend our life in doing community development. One of the failures of my generation, and I hold myself responsible for it, is that perhaps in our quest for scaling up our developmental work, compared to our mentors, we have been able to scale up our work at various levels. We have failed to encourage the next generation to take on similar kind of activities, and that's my personal feeling. Yes. Yeah, does that satisfy you?
Yes, Mr. Paul.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you will prove to be a role model for our generation and, the ones following
Yeah,
us.
yeah,
Thank you so
yeah.
much. But the second part is
You
how
asked
do you?
also about how we set up the organization, right?
And funding.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
See, funding is never a problem. Okay, there are sufficient number of institutions and human beings who are always ready to provide support for a proper program. So what you need to do really, what we did was once you understand what is the the dire needs of the community, and if you can in a participatory manner, we used to write proposals about for a period of say 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or 15 years as a perspective plan. And then if you can present it to an organization which is geared to support uh, change and development at the grassroots, you can get the funds. I mean, when we started off in 1987, look, when we started in 1980 in National Dairy Development Board, funds were never a problem because Dr. Kurian, as the chairman of the organization, had already organized all that. But when we got out by ourselves and came to the mountains, now we had to do all this ourselves, not only the planning but also the funding portion. And so there were organizations like the Ford Foundation, the Swiss Development Cooperation Office, then several of the embassies, they used to support programs. Then later on, we shifted more or less to an organization called the Sir Dorabji Tata Trust. He was one of the sons of the Jamshedji Tata. And Jamshedji Tata actually had two sons, Ratan Tata and Dorabji Tata. Both these boys, they were in the national movement of freedom struggle, and they were, sort of supporting the freedom fighters, etc., etc. And both of them left their legacy, 90% of their wealth, for enabling rural development and other changes in the country. And through this trust, there's one named after Dorabji and one named after Ratan. So, and now, of course, the current Tata, Ratan Tata, has merged all of them into the Tata Trust, as they're called. So, I don't think, this question which people keep saying that, how can you do this? Where will you get the money? That is not the issue. The issue is that do you have sufficient motivation? Do you have that strength and that conviction and the courage to actually sit out there? Because the thing is, you got to devote a long period of time. It's like, say, as a very poor analogy, okay? Take people like Dr. say Geeta Lakhanpal and others over there. Isn't it a lifetime that you spend as a teacher? Do you spend just 3 years and then say, okay, I'm going to go and do something else? It takes a lifetime. So similarly for rural development, it takes a lifetime to sit out there and do something. So this new idea which people have that, hey, the moment you get into rural development, you must have an exit policy and get out in 3 years' time. See, all this is a myth. It doesn't work like that. It works, and money is never a problem. People want to know that you are genuinely involved and you want to be engaged in change and development. And anyway, that's been our experience, not just for us personally, but for a whole lot of friends and colleagues we have, that money has never been the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Kalyan Paul, for that wonderful session. In the man-nature relationship thematic, which we have been trying to follow up since yesterday, yours has been a very valuable contribution. You not only introduced us to this wonderful concept of Schumacher's study of economics should be done as if people matter. People, which I believe as inclusive of everything around him. But you also suggested very strongly that we should renew our economical ideologies as also ideologies vis-a-vis developmental interventions. You also handed out to us a ready roadmap how we can make our lives simpler and wholesome and happier, and thereby live in peace with nature, very simply put. Thank you very much, Mr. Paul,
Thank you.
for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I now call upon my colleague, Dr. Bhagwant Kaur, to begin the next academic session with she in the chair. Dr. Bhagwant. Thank you. Dr. Bhagwant, can you hear us? Nidhi, please do the needful.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes, Bhagwant, you're there.
Yes, yes.
Over to you.
I think that was a very interesting morning session we had. And now we begin our academic session for the day. I call upon today's speakers, Tahiti Sarkar, I think is here with us. And I think we have Humana. Humana, is there?
Yes, present.
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are, Tahiti. And I think I will begin with you. It will do good if you introduce yourself to the audience and begin your paper.
Good morning, one and all present over here, respected chair and all the eminent speakers and participants. This is Dr. Tahiti Sarkar, and I am from the Department of History, University of North Bengal, in West Bengal. So I'm just trying to show here my PPT and starting my presentation. Let's see.
Nidhi, can't you
it's not coming, I don't know.
Nidhi, can you guide her?
Yes, ma'am. Tahiti, what?
I'm just trying to share a window, but my PPT is not opening. I don't know why.
So when you say share window, just click on the image of the window you want to share, and then the present button will turn blue from gray.
Actually, then my PPT is not showing, though I have minimized it.
No, you open your PPT first.
Okay, okay, I have opened. Then what?
No, you keep your PPT minimized. Then you click on present now. You will be asked to choose window, Chrome tab, and entire screen. So choose window.
So then what should I choose? A window, right?
Yes, you choose window, and then you click, or it will open onto a box, and it will click on PPT. Just click on that PPT that you want to share, and then click on present now. Or would you like to email it to me? I will share it for you.
Yeah, I can do that. If you please could do that, I can do. What is your email ID? Can you please send it?
Yeah, I've just shared it.
What we can do at Tahiti, Nidhi, you can give her your email.
Yeah,
send her in the group so she can note down. Can we begin with Numana in the meantime? And we will get back
to coming. I don't understand
this. Just email it to me, and I will share it.
Okay, I'm just emailing it to. I'm just writing it in the group. Okay.
No, please send it as an email to me so that I can access it on my laptop.
Okay, so, can you please tell me your email ID?
It's nidverma, NIDVERMA @gmail.com.
NID?
It's in the chat box, Tahiti. Could you cut and paste it from there?
Oh, okay, I'm just trying.
The one without the capital, the first one. I think this is going to take.
Start your talk in the meantime while I get the email and I start presenting. Is that okay, Bhagwant ma'am?
Yeah, please do. If you already access that, then it's beautiful. Please.
Have you sent it?
Yeah, I'm sending it.
Ma'am, we have 2 papers or 3 papers in the session?
Two papers, because Indrani Das Gupta is not there.
Okay.
So we will have Tahiti's and Numana's Ibrahim Bhatt's paper.
All right.
If Numana is there, I think we can begin with Numana. Numana, are you there? I can't see you.
Yes, ma'am, I am here. Hello?
Can you begin the paper?
Am I audible?
You are?
Yes, ma'am. I am here.
Please begin with your paper. Introduce yourself first, please, and then.
Okay, ma'am. Good morning, everybody. I am Numana Ibrahim. First off, I would like to apologize for my very unstable internet connection, since I am currently placed in Jammu and Kashmir, and as you all know, we only have 2G access to the internet. So I'll not be switching on my video for this presentation because I believe that will then hinder my audio. So if that's okay.
That's okay, Numana. I would love to hear you. Though we would have loved it if we could see you, but maybe some other time. That's okay.
Perhaps, ma'am, during the interaction afterwards, I could switch on the video and try and so that you could place a face to the name.
Okay.
Anyway, the title of the paper that I'm presenting today is Witnessing Nature Through Animation, an eco-critical study of, I'm sorry, excuse me for a minute. So Witnessing Nature Through Animation, an eco-critical study of Happy Feet and Moana. The ecological crises and the anxiety thereof have found their expression through all media platforms. As a consequence, the environmental debate has made its way into the collective consciousness of the human species. The addition of ecological issues into the repertoire of accepted and acknowledged themes of popular culture has led to the cultivation of sensitivity towards them. Animation as a genre has been successful in incorporating the green praxis into the mainstream imagination due to the creative license it affords. Whereas the early forays into the genre were heavily anthropomorphized caricatures of animal beings like Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, etc., the evolution of the artistic sensibilities and digital animations has ensured a more realistic portrayal of diverse life forms. Artists are now at the liberty to create magnificent worlds with exhaustive details on the screen due to digital animation. Consequently, the narratives have also become increasingly complex to accommodate the shifts in the current environmental thought. The texts that I have analyzed for the paper are Warner Brothers Studios' Happy Feet, which was released in 2006, and Walt Disney Animation Studios' Moana, released in 2016. These films have been selected for their novel engagement with the ecological narrative, marginalized protagonists, and the more than human world. In building my argument, I have drawn on the modalities of depiction of the natural world, engagement through sentiment, and the idea of bearing witness. Happy Feet and Moana are both essentially ecological narratives which invite the audiences to witness their unfolding on the screen and thereafter reflect upon the meaning. Both the films present the aspects of human complicity in the environmental degradation and the agency to tackle the issues arising from it. Through their protagonists, the films engage with the world from the marginalized perspectives of an animal and a woman. In so doing, they enrich and broaden the landscape of ecological narratives. The familiar worlds are defamiliarized within these films to facilitate the generation of a counter perspective, prompting a deeper evaluation of the human ethical system, which allows the apathetic exploitation of environment. This creates a connection between the fictional world and the audiences, stimulating a perceptivity shift achieved by what David Whitley calls the engagement through sentiment. Moving on to the analysis of the films, I will first begin by introducing an unlikely savior in the form of Mumble in the film Happy Feet. This Warner Brothers production, set in the continent of Antarctica, is primarily a buildings Roman focused around the penguin Mumble. This animation decenters the human egocentrism by its depiction of the animals and their worlds. The film also critiques the impact human exploitation has on other habitats. Happy Feet has been applauded for its realistic depiction of the animal behavior, landscape, and interactions in its human-less world. The multi-layered portrayal of the animal beings of Antarctica brings this exotic landscape to life and affords us a vantage point to witness its intricate dynamics. The film translates the patterns of the actual penguins by depicting not only their social interactions, but their personal relationships as well, thus emulating the impression of observing the ethos of these animal beings in their natural habitat. The protagonist Mumble is born to a pair of emperor penguins who attract each other by using the heart song. The male emperor penguins do in fact display a boisterous courtship call to attract the females. And once the eggs are laid, the females venture into the sea in order to feed, leaving the males in charge of the incubation. The males then hurdle together with the eggs between their legs to bear the harsh winter. The females return after 2 months so as to feed the newly hatched eggs and relieve the males, who then move to the sea in search of food. The film depicts this mating process with absolute accuracy, thereby making us witness to the ethos of the species. It is during this incubation phase that Mumble's father Memphis drops his egg, eventually leading to his wobbly feet, earning him the title of Happy Feet. Mumble's dancing feet thus become a distinctive characteristic that I will return to later. Am I audible?
Yes, Yes, though
Hello?
it's breaking.
I am terribly sorry for my...
No, it's really smooth. But you can continue, Naman.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. Thank you. The frozen Antarctic landscape, which to the human mind might appear a barren wasteland, is in reality a thriving ecosystem. Apart from the various penguin species, it is home to other creatures like skua birds, leopard seals, elephant seals, etc. The Antarctic is thus presented as a cosmopolitan ecosystem where all species operate to accommodate the necessity of coterminous existence in order to maintain the welfare of the system as a whole. The film also brings to attention the imbalance caused by increasing encroachment and destruction of habitat at the hands of humans. Due to industrial fishing, lesser fish remain in the sea, leading to a greater struggle for survival. This apathetic manner of human exploitation is depicted by a fleet of fishing ships pulling gigantic nets from the net, which are obviously filled with fish. The position of the penguins in the natural food chain further heightens their vulnerability. In absence of fish, they become the next best source of food for predators such as leopard seals and orcas. Again, the vulnerability of animal beings in the face of human incursion is pronounced by the penguin named Lovelace, a self-styled mystical guru. His distinction stems from what he calls the sacred talisman around his neck. In reality, what he wears are the discarded plastic rings from the dumped trash site at the human colony, which the animal beings, not surprisingly, have come to call the Forbidden Shore. Having failed to remove them from his neck, the penguins watch helplessly as the plastic rings choke Lovelace. Upon finding a plastic dustbin, a plastic toy, plastic cups, plastic rings, plastic containers, as well as a rubber slipper floating on the pond at the human colony, the penguins are forced to wonder, why have they left them behind? These discarded materials are the mementos that the annihilator, as the humans are called, leaves in his wake. In this way, the film integrates what Cynthia Dieterich calls the toxic consciousness of the humans to draw home their seminal role as the producers of waste. The antagonistic equation between the animal and the human beings is buttressed by the inability of the animals to communicate with the humans. Mumble repeatedly expresses a desire to speak to the humans about the destructive impact their actions have on the animal life. Upon finally encountering the humans, he begins to speak with them, appealing to their better nature to take stock of the detrimental consequences of their actions. To his horror, he realizes that humans don't speak Grin, and his speech sounds nothing more than screeches to them. This is where his unusual dancing feet come to his aid. As a young girl taps on the glass wall of his enclosure, he responds by tapping his feet. Dancing is thus propagated as an alternative communication technique, which, when coupled with the arts of witnessing, bridges the gap between these beings. The film ends on a happy note with fish returning to the sea, thereby signifying a return of the harmony within the ecosystem. Thus, Mumble becomes an unlikely restorer with the support of the humans who have come to realize the wrong of their ways. He becomes a bridge between nature and culture, bringing about a perceptivity shift, thereby promoting the agency of the animal beings and, by extension, the more than human world. I will now move on to Moana, who, as I contend, can be seen as an eco-feminist princess. Moana, the Disney film, is based on the classic trope of self-discovery. The film is an allegorical representation of the current degraded state of nature. The characters are personified versions of important aspects of the ecological debate. Exposition sets out that all life existed in harmony until Maui, the demigod of wind and sea, stole the heart of Te Fiti, the proverbial Mother Nature, which could create life itself. The heart is the literal embodiment of the balanced state which is disturbed. As soon as Maui steals the heart, he unleashes upon the world a terrible darkness, a monster of earth and fire, Te Kā, signifying a rupture in the order of nature. Thus, the task of restoration falls upon the shoulders of Moana, representing the human species. Her task is to ensure the restoration of the world to its previous harmonious state, failing which the consequences would be apocalyptic. The plot thus spells out the consequences that await us as a society if we fail to act upon the ecological problems at this historical juncture. In a clear departure from Disney's passive princess trope, Moana is an enterprising young woman who is destined to lead the tribal community of Motunui. She is an able and utile agent within her domestic space. Motunui, her village, is depicted as a domestic space, a sort of paradisal Eden, which provides for the needs of its inhabitants, thereby symbolizing culture. However, Moana wishes for an adventure. Stability throughout the movie has been presented as a patriarchal concept personified by the father, and movement as a matriarchal idea propagated by the grandmother. Whereas the father restricts her to the safety of the land, her sense of adventure and the wildness of spirit are inherited through the matriarch, thus subverting the stereotype of the wild as space for masculine expression. Maui, a narcissist demigod who considers himself to be the hero of all, can be read as a personification of technology. Maui was born to human parents and was able to achieve feats such as pulling the sky, stealing the fire, lassoing the sun, harnessing the breeze, pulling islands from the sea, all this for the welfare of the human beings. Similarly, technology emerged from the humans and evolved to make life easier and convenient for us. Interestingly, the technological advances at present make the manifestation of such acts quite achievable and comprehensible. Therefore, it is not accidental that Tefiti, a feminine goddess, is dealt her death blow by Maui, the masculine embodiment of technology. Throughout the film, the oar has been established as a metaphor for agency. As they leave the island, Maui is in control of the way forward. Moana has abdicated her throne, her oar to him, and with it her agency. She then becomes a mere spectator as Maui takes charge. This moment is an even more poignant telling of how technological advances have forced humans to turn into mute witnesses of display of technology and nature by forfeiting their agency. However, the sentient ocean intervenes and takes the oar from Maui to hand it back to Moana. This act could thus be interpreted as nature imploring the humankind to take charge. The film could not have suggested a more direct way forward by having technology play an assisting role in the human quest to seek a reharmonized future. The restoration of order is achieved in the climactic scenes where, keeping true to its ecofeminist narrative, it is revealed that Moana is not just the deliverer of Maui, but also the restorer of Mother Nature. As she witnesses Maui holding off the car at a distance, realization hits her that the wrathful demon and the mother island are the same entity. By depriving her of the essence, a hurt and injured Tefiti has transformed herself into this vengeful creature. This reflects the implications that an exploited nature could have on the world. It also reiterates the dyadic essence of nature, which is capable of both sustaining and destroying us. A hostile Saka charges like a feral wounded predator towards Moana, who walks towards her with compassion, love, and understanding to restore not just order and harmony to the world, but also an identity to the disfigured Tefiti. This then becomes the ultimate act of humility and compassion, which brings the sentimental engagement full circle. Moana's unique positioning within the dynamics of the film suggests a more coalescent way forward. She is crowned the chief and leads her people into the more agile future by taking on the mantle of explorers and wayfarers. Thus, she lives in both worlds, the sea and the land, while also acting as the connecting link between the patriarchal and matriarchal systems of thought, and embodies the sentiment of stability through movement. In conclusion, I would only like to reiterate that any mode of cultural production which wishes to engage with the more than human world has to begin by highlighting and drawing our attention to the distinct rhythms and modalities which can enable a reevaluation of the existing signification system. The idea of bearing witness, for example, is an ethical stance which seeks to explore and respond to others in the fullness of their particular ethos or way of life. The art of witness can potentially then lead to awareness and action. It is through Mumble and Moana that culture has been called upon to acknowledge its own dichotomous relationship with nature. In shifting perspectives and witnessing through other species, humanity is implored to realize that the only way forward is through cultivating a cosmopolitan ecosystem which benefits diverse forms of life. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Numana. We really enjoyed the paper. And,
Thank
this
you, ma'am.
actually is a continuation, yes, of what Dr. Pankaj was talking about. It's
Absolutely, ma'am.
seeing this disaster from the other point of view. How would an animal, from the marginalized perspective, of animals and even women, how
Women,
they would,
yeah,
yeah, see this, how would they react? Brings to mind
react.
Chaucer, when he says, what would happen if the lion painted, you know, and then maybe we'll have a
Exactly.
different painting altogether. Very, very interesting. Thank you so much. And I
Thank you
think
so much,
we
ma'am. Thank
will
you.
take questions. In the meantime, you can put your questions in the chat box, everyone, and we'll take questions at the end of Tahiti's paper. Yes, Tahiti, are you ready?
Yes.
Can we, yeah, begin? Yeah.
Am I audible?
You are. You are.
Okay, so is my PPT visible?
I think yes,
Yes, Tahiti,
it is.
Okay, so the title of my paper is British Forest Policy and Everyday Resistances of People, an Overview of Colonial Darjeeling. So actually, as the theme of the seminar is on ecocentrism, actually on human-nature relationship. So actually, man-nature relationship can be, I think, analyzed through two lenses. First is that through the lens of harmony, and secondly is through the lens of conflict. So it is the second lens that, or the second aspect that actually my paper is based on, and it is actually a regional study rather on the district of Darjeeling, and I would be primarily talking about the nature of colonial forestry and whether there was any conflict that is coming as a result of the encounter with the colonial route. Now, to begin with, as we see that most of the seminal writings on colonial forest history of India, whether it is either it is macro narrative or the micro narrative, they are basically talking about. It is not that they are not addressing the man nature conflict. But mostly the areas covered till date by the historical work or the eminent historical works, mostly they are talking about the central Gangetic plains or the southern valleys or the central and western Himalayas. But the Darjeeling Hills, they form a significant part of the eastern Himalayas. Now, this particular region, it actually has remained unattended, or rather an completely unexcavated zone in the dominant historical research on colonial forestry. So if we try to, and that is how I feel the actually necessity to carrying on research on this particular area. So whether there was any kind of indigenous resistance as the result of the colonial encounter, if we try to analyze that, actually two things has to be understood first, that what would the impact of the colonization on the forestry of Darjeeling. This is the first thing. The nature of the very nature of the colonial state making or the process of state making, and secondly, whether there was any presence or absence of any significant resistance from the inhabitants of the forestry actually. Now, if we briefly look at the historiography on this forest-based popular resistance, we will see that dominant writers like Atul Saklani or Mahesh Rangarajan and many more eminent scholars, they have actually, by their writings, they have rather established a tradition on protest and agitations on forestry. And from, if we take the time period from 1870 to 1940s, we see there are some dominant major peasant rebellions. And some of the examples, if we try to bring, is that Pike rebellion in 1817 in Odisha, then Sandhal rebellion in Chotanagpur in 1855, then the Rampa rebellion in 1879, and then tribal rebellion of 1899, and such other histories may continue can be continued up to 1924. But as I have mentioned that there is a big gap in addressing this specific particular geographical region called Eastern Himalayas. So Darjeeling forestry and the colonial encounters or the reaction of the indigenous people, it has actually never been properly addressed in the recent historiographical work. So, and here in my paper, actually, I'm trying to do that. So, to begin with, initially, I would like to give you a brief overview about the ecological fragility of the Darjeeling forest. So, we know that here we can see that the forest of the Eastern Himalayas and specifically of Darjeeling actually, due to its distinctive climate, rainfall, soil, topography and other habitat factors, it actually gave rise to tropical rainforest and mountain temperate forests. And as a part of the Eastern Himalaya, Darjeeling, it is characterized not only by its ecological fragility, but also by a deep historical, demographic, and geographical sensitivity. So Darjeeling Himalayas, it never constituted a part of the Hindu or the Mughal imperial complex. If we try to briefly locate the pre-colonial history of Darjeeling, we will see that it was never actually a part of the Hindu or the Mughal imperial complex. And the demographic complexion of Darjeeling Hills, it is a product of the long and the complex process of migration, not only from Sikkim, Nepal, but also from Tibet, Bhutan, and also from the countries of Southeast Asian region. So all these things actually created a high degree of ethnic and cultural differentiation, creating thereby vital links between the subcontinent and those of the South and Southeast Asia. So briefly, this is about the ecological. Talk about as a background of, if I briefly talk about the history, general history of the colonization of the Indian forest, we will be seeing that colonization of Indian forest, it actually started as a process with the historic memorandum by Lord Dalhousie in 1855. And if we trace the ideological background behind this, actually, we will see that the very actually embedded in the colonial ethos of utilitarianism, firstly, and secondly, civilizing the savage. So these two colonial ideologies actually they served as the background for the British interest to establish unquestionable control over the forest of India, all over India. And the very process started with the historic charter of Lord Dalhousie in 1855. And in subsequent years, we see that a number of forest legislations are coming. Now, Darjeeling is very special or has a very special position in that because the first Forest Act, it was introduced in the year 1865, and scientific forest conservation started in 1864. So that it was Darjeeling that actually witnessed for the first time the attempts of colonial process of scientific forest conservation. So it was Darjeeling where scientific forest conservation took place for the first time. And after that, the first Forest Act, that is in 1865, it was rather drafted in Darjeeling. So Darjeeling, this is how we can say that Darjeeling occupies a very important position in the colonial attempts of scientific forestry or in the history of Forest Act. Here in the PPT, I have mostly talked about the Forest Act of 1878 because this is actually a very important act, or rather a proper act for the process of colonization in forests, which actually divided the forest into three categories. It was the reserve forest, number one category, second was the protected forest, and third one was the village forest. So briefly, if I talk about all these subdivisions in one word, it could be said that in the first two categories, that is reserve forest and protected forest, so it was unquestionable right over the forestry of the colonial government was established. So the colonial government, they established their unquestionable right over the forestry by the initial two divisions, that is reserve forest and protected forest. But the third division, that is the village forest, on pen and paper at least, or in the act itself, it was meant for the villagers, or it was saying that in the third category, village forest, rights of the villagers will be established, or villagers or the forest dwellers, they will be getting the prominence over the settlement of rights. But that unfortunately, this thing actually remained only on pen on paper, and it never could become a reality. And it is the third division which actually created a lot of kind of oppression, colonial oppression particularly on the forests of Darjeeling. And this particular third category, that is village forest, it actually was always considered as a hindrance on the path of development. And the rights over the villages, over the forestry, it was never accepted by the British government. Rather, the inhabitants here, I would like to particularly speak about only one tribe actually, those who were the original inhabitants of Darjeeling, or the Lepchas, the autochthons of Darjeeling. So primarily they were the forest dwellers, and it was said in the 1878 Act that they would have their rights on the village forest, but that could not become that could not be realized by the colonial government, and they actually colonial rule called for the complete diminution of the customary rights of the indigenous forest communities, and rather this village forest, they were always regarded as an obstruction on the way of urbanization, development, or colonial process of state building. So the Lepchas, or the original inhabitants of Darjeeling, they were forced to migrate and re-migrate continuously, leaving their villages, and they were continuously they had been forced by the colonial government to leave their original homeland and migrate southwards. So then the next. Now, when I have started my research on this particular area, here I have summarized the major findings of my research on the very nature of the indigenous resistances. So my first major finding is that the indigenous people, that is principally the Lepchas, they actually could not form any meaningful voice of contestation against the colonial power. So this is the first most important observation. And in all the other points, we would try to seek that why this particular thing actually happened, why there was no meaningful voice coming out from the indigenous inhabitants. Then the second major finding of my study is that the indigenous people of Darjeeling Hills, to the indigenous people of Darjeeling Hills, respect for nature, it was reflected in their attitude to land. And to them, land was not a commodity, but a gift of nature. And their allegiance to the Raja of Sikkim, it was without question. Now, initially, before colonization, actually, Darjeeling was a part of Sikkim, British Sikkim, and all the inhabitants of Darjeeling, they were actually the subjects of the Raja of Sikkim. That is why their allegiance to the Raja of Sikkim, it was without question. And the proprietary right, this is a very important thing to point out, that the proprietary right of a land and forest, it was a concept that was traditionally alien to them. That means there was not at all the concept of the right over the proprietary right over the forest. And the traditional economy, it was run on barter system, and the taxes that was due to the Raja of Sikkim, they were paid either in cash or through labor. So this situation actually denotes the pre-colonial situation in Darjeeling. That is, before the colonial occupation of Darjeeling, this was the socio-economic condition. Now, till Darjeeling, the third major finding is that till Darjeeling tract was brought under colonial control, the indigenous people continued to be governed by their customary rules, rituals, and practices. The British occupation of Darjeeling and their concomitant interventions in forest, it actually significantly altered the vision of life and the mode of subsistence of the indigenous people. The replacement of barter economy by the money economy, or rather capitalist economy, brought about fundamental changes in their life and in the pattern of livelihood. And this new system of economy, it prevented them from the natural inner transmigration, which was essential both for shifting cultivation and cattle grazing. The primary two primary occupations generally that we see of having the forest dwellers are having all over India. So this new type of economy that was introduced with the colonial government, it actually prevented them from continuing their actual occupation, that is shifting cultivation and grazing. And the colonial notion of rights over the forest and land, it was a contested issue became between the indigenous people and the colonial state, with the colonial state as a temporal power and a self-proclaimed guardian of Darjeeling and her forest. But unfortunately, such contestation in the form of resistance did never take the shape in Darjeeling Hills. So there were conflicts, areas of conflict, but we can never say that any significant contestation is coming out from on the part of the forest dwellers. One significant development that took place is with the growing of tea plantation. As we all know, that Darjeeling all over in the world is actually known for its tea. So tea plantation was a major pillar of economy, or rather colonial economy of Darjeeling. And with the growing or tea plantation, or the expansion of tea plantation, we see that the indigenous people were gradually outnumbered by the growing number of the migrated laborers primarily from the eastern part of Nepal and from Sikkim, Tibet, and Bhutan. So resultantly, what we see that the outnumbered and the marginalized indigenous people, they have failed to establish any social voice of consciousness that was needed to be created on the sustained socio-religious, cultural, and economic institutions.
I'm sorry. Hello, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but please try to conclude now.
Okay.
We're running out of time.
Okay. The next important observation was that the official correspondences of East India Company and the other sources of British historiography, they actually make us believe that it was not the forests in Darjeeling that were the primary interest of the British. Rather, the Britishers were far more interested in creating a sanatorium in Darjeeling. So forests were it was the primary consideration of the British. Now, another important observation was that the already existing land settlement system in Bengal at that point of time, it was the zamindari khas, or self-cultivated holdings, or the rayati system. Now, Unfortunately, none of these systems were there in Darjeeling. So there was not at all any predefined or firmly established land settlement system which could actually help the indigenous people for contesting for their powers. And the most serious consequence of colonial forestry, it was the diminution of the customary rights and the decline of the traditional conservation and the management of forests, and the curtailment of communitarian and ownership of forest, and also undermining the subsistence economy. So I'm concluding now. And in conclusion, I would say that if we see that if we try to analyze the nature of the resistance against the colonial power, we see basically two type of trends. One was represented by the elite resistance, and second was the subaltern resistance. Now, the elite section of Darjeeling society, it was primarily formed by the migrant laborers, those who came primarily to work in the tea plantations, and these were comprised of Nepalis, Bhutias, and Tibetans. But unfortunately, the indigenous inhabitants or the lepchas, they remained, they had a primordial life, and they remained as the forest dwellers. They could not be incorporated in the new system of economy. And if we see the nature of resistances, they could not go beyond submission of petty petitions or memorandums. So there was no meaningful voice actually coming as a subaltern resistance against the colonial domination in the Darjeeling forest. So thank you. With this, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tahiti. I think that was a very, very nicely researched paper. And of course, gives us lots of food for thought. And again, I would say what we were talking in the morning and what Dr. Pankaj was talking, how, these indigenous people themselves, they are being uprooted again and again. So that comes, I think there's both the papers, they blend very well for what we talked in the morning. And now I open these for discussions. And I would really like our students and other people from the audience to address these two speakers and ask. I can see a question from Avichal. Avichal is an assistant professor in SGNT Khalsa, and he's a young colleague. And Avichal, I think you can unmute yourself and address your question directly. I think this is to Tahiti, if I'm not mistaken. Avichal?
Am I audible?
You are, Avichal.
Okay, so yes, my question is to the second speaker. I am not able to pronounce the name correctly. How is it spelled?
It's Tahiti.
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 Okay, yeah. So Tahiti, you mentioned about shifting cultivation being a part of the people in Darjeeling. But I wanted to know that is it same as jhum cultivation or are they different? And if it is the same, then what I have read so far is that jhum cultivation has been banned because it is considered to be hazardous for the environment. So could you elaborate on this?
Shifting cultivation and jhum cultivation, firstly, they are the same. Jhum is just the indigenous terminology used here. Now, that is what I am, my paper is all about on your second question, that it is all about, it is the notions that we are keeping that this jhum cultivation is hazardous for nature. It is actually a colonial construction. Actually, like the process of jhum cultivation is that you cultivate on a particular place and then you burn the place and leave the place. It may be hazardous, but there are other kind of eco-friendly practices that were actually maintained by the indigenous forest dwellers. Because you have to understand one thing is that indigenous forest dwellers, they are actually living in and living with the nature. So they won't actually do too much for the destruction of environment that actually the colonial powers are doing. So here what we see is that as there was no established ruling class in Darjeeling, in my case, we see that the colonizers, they have established their unquestionable right over the forest of Darjeeling, and they did the deforestation ruthlessly, And this process, in this process, they actually forced the indigenous dwellers to shift continuously from their homeland. And obviously, this June cultivation, it was regarded as a hindrance on their process of development. But what they were actually doing, establishing the tea gardens or development of urbanization at the cost of the forest, they were actually doing no good for the forest. I hope I have been able to answer your question.
Yeah, Tahiti, thank you so much for the clarification. There's another question here in the chat box. One of our students, uh, because the names are not displayed, I don't know who he or she is, but I'm going to read out the question. Or maybe if roll number 3317 is there, do you want to ask the question yourself? Okay, I'll read it out. What
No,
I
ma'am.
know,
No,
yeah.
ma'am. Actually, you can address that question.
Chirag Paul, though, he believes, he's saying that I don't think that the meaning is conveyed in Moana to audience in a clear way. This is, I think, to Numana. It is more considered to be entertainment. The songs are good, but it is not quite serious on these issues discussed here. The movie could have been more serious. What are your thoughts on this? Interesting question.
Well, of
Thank you,
course,
Chirag.
interesting. Yes, thank you, Chirag. It's an interesting question, and I would like to consider that it is Moana is in fact a Disney movie, a Disney film. Now, if you consider, we use film in the sense of it being a text, a literary text, but it is essentially a movie which is, made to cater to a certain sect of audience, especially young viewers who enjoy the genre of animation. So they would, of course, have to bring these ideas or present these ideas in a way to make it, sort of intelligible for the young ones to follow. However, reading the text, reading the film as a text would then, from an initiated perspective into the environmental, literary criticism would then require you to kind of read a lot more than what is just apparent on the screen. So they would, of course, not tell you that Moana is an ecofeminist or Maui is a personification of technology. These, of course, are my own interpretations of the text. And reading it from the environmental perspective, I have realized that suppose Maui is a demigod. He is flesh and bone. In that sense, he is corporeal. But I have read him within the understanding of how technology impacts or kind of, the role it plays in the, hegemony that we have established over nature. So, of course, these are my own readings and my own interpretations of the text. And you are correct in saying that it is the message has not been kind of established in this serious tone in the movie, seeing as it is it has been made for entertainment purposes, and they of course have to look into their own, if they are putting in so much of their money into making a film, they of course have to kind of ensure that they receive all of it back. So yes, you're right, but I would then suggest that reading it from the initiated perspective kind of opens up these undertones in the text. So yeah, I hope that's
there. Yeah, that's there, Numana, and thank you for the explanation. And besides Chirag, we have to realize this is not one of those art movies or a documentary. No, as Numana said, is made with a purpose, is catering to a certain audience, but also what you take back from a text or a movie, that matters. And sometimes small things, small scenes, small even for certain dialogues, they stay with you. In morning, Dr. Pankaj was mentioning of how these lights, bright lights, on the beaches, they are hindering the growth or the hatching, or even actually they are instrumental in many of these very young turtles dying because they start moving in the opposite direction. Instead of going towards the sea, they are moving towards the opposite direction, And by the time, they realize it's morning and there's no time, the sun is harsh, and they die there. They get roasted there. I remember as a very young child, I saw a documentary. I don't even remember which documentary. And this particular scene had really touched me. And I could sleep that night thinking how these little babies are dying there. So it's also, what you take back from the text. That's very important. It might impact, it might have that desired effect. And of course, it's about reading the text the way we see it. Jyoti Shaman has another, there's a question there. Would you like to ask yourself? I really would love I really like this thing of audience directly, posing that questions. Would you?
Yeah, hello, ma'am.
Yeah,
hello,
please
ma'am. Can you hear me?
Please do. Yeah, we can.
Yeah, no, ma'am. It was less a question, more of an observation, ma'am. In fact, the first time I watched the movie, I had similar kinds of observation. In fact, the visualization and the way the entire greenery and the entire interaction with the environment has been presented, I think it does communicate. And even if it's targeted to a certain class of audience, by that I mean, I'm not saying that this is a movie meant for children, but I think that kind of an ethics, if is better suited for an animation movie. And if children are to learn certain kind of environmental ethics, I think that movie could work as a great vehicle for it. And that was my observation. Sure. I mean, it's very connected with the paper that was presented.
Yeah, really. So, any other observations, comments, questions, queries, anything? Anyone? Okay, that's it. So we really had two very invigorating, very thought-provoking papers today, and I'm really thankful to you, Tahiti, for joining. And Numana, we would, Numana, I think you had your constraints because of that internet connection, but we would love to see certain scenes from the movie. But you've done your job. I think many of us would now sit back, and I haven't seen, I haven't seen the movie. So I would really love to see these movies now. So the job is done. Thank you so much. We have another comment by Uma. She really liked your paper. They're very extensively researched papers. Thank you, Uma, for that lovely comment, and it's been conveyed to the paper readers. And with that, we break. We have a coffee break, and we reassemble. I think the next session is going to start at 12:45. So we reassemble at 12:45 after a break. Thank you so much.
No,
thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Oh no, sorry.
It's 11:30 right now.
Okay, so we start your session a bit early. Can we do that?
I mean, the next two presenters are Miss Priya and Miss Aditi. If they can maybe start at 12 or something.
It's your session, Ashish. Next.
Yes. So we can start. I mean, we can start at 11:45 or 12. I mean, if it's
Priya, we can start at 12. In fact, yes, that'd be quite nice. A gap. We can. We can start at 12.
So we can start at 12, and the same link can be used once again.
Yes. Please note the same link that was generated in the morning. That's going to work till our lunch break.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Thank
see
you
you
so
everyone.
Much.